Hello, I'm Charna Davis-Wiese, and welcome to UCF in Print. So, how much do you hate going to work? Did you ever have a boss who just made your life miserable? Today's guest is a UCF professor who may be able to change all that. Join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Ford, and his book is called, this book at least, this particular book is called Leading with a Laugh, 101 Funny Stories and 300 Serious Insights. Now, I'm sure I am not alone, Dr. Ford, to say that I have had some really, really terrible bosses in my lifetime and in my career. And I've had some really great bosses. And the terrible ones did not get a lot of good work out of us. It was being in television, when our ratings were the lowest, we had somebody terrorizing us, usually. So that doesn't surprise you, does it?
Not a bit. We find in some of the research we've done that people aren't having much fun. And we did a survey a few years ago and surveyed human resource managers. And we said, what is it you think happens in your organizations in terms of how much fun they're having? And we found 75% of them said they're not having enough fun. About 3% said they were. And the rest weren't sure, which of course may speak to the respondents. But the interesting thing to us was that most people felt that their organizations weren't enough fun. And so we pursued that even further, and the reason we got into this is we were fascinated, as you know, my background is I came to UCF to be a part of the hospitality program, and one of the things that struck me coming out of the background of dealing with Goodyear tires and General Motors cars is that they never talked much about how important it was for people to be having a good time at work and to laugh and smile. And when you're in hospitality, you realize quite quickly that there's a contagiousness to smiling and having fun. And when customers come into an organization, to a restaurant or a hotel or a retail establishment or a bank, if you are met by somebody with a dour look or grumpy or yells at you or sneers at you or something, it tends to not make you very happy with the experience. General Motors cars coming down the assembly line don't care if you swear at them or stick your tongue out at them or do something that makes the car feel bad, because cars don't feel bad, but people do. And so I got fascinated with the topic of why it's important to have fun in work organizations, and that led to this study, which then led to an awareness of the kinds of things people do to have fun and the benefits of having fun in organizations. And just to close the circle here on how we got to this book, is we realized that most managers don't really know how to have fun, or to bring a sense of funness, if you will, into their organizations. So we tried to invent, if you will, a term called funology. And the idea would be that people could find ways of using jokes or anecdotes or some kinds of fun, laughter-provoking behaviors that would allow their organizations to be a fun place to work instead of a dreary one. You know,
just the environment itself as well. I had one situation where the big boss said the fish stinks from the head. It's the old cliche, and what it meant was, oh, our ratings were really bad, let's get rid of all the people at the top. But in reality, he was so stern, and he was giving the person under him a hard time, who was giving the hard time, and all the way down. And it created, there was such an environment, I don't think anybody would have laughed at, even if Robin Williams came in. I don't think they would have laughed. The whole feeling in the place was terrible, and our product was awful. It was really bad.
Well, you have data to support that, actually, that in the study we did, we found out that the reason people have fun work environments is because somebody at a senior level of management actually promotes it. In very rare instances, there'll be some fun-loving soul who flitters around the organization and somehow makes people laugh anyway. But by and large, it's the big Quahana up there at the top who says, you know, let's find a way to enjoy the workplace and to make work fun.
Is it a business legend, or is it true that Pixar is fun? You know, you hear that Pixar, it may have gotten so big now, it is major corporate, but would that be a situation where, yeah, take a look at what happened here?
Well, if you look at all of the creative organizations, they all tend to have a reputation for being fun places to work. And I think a lot of that is due to the fact that people who define themselves as being creative people look for organizations that they can work in that promote whatever it is they they want to do. And most people want to have fun at work. So if you can find a creative organization and you're a creative person and you're in demand and you have a choice between a fun work organization and a non-fun work organization, which one are you going to choose?
And you were talking about leaving, the people who leave. If the place is a real drag to go into,
Yeah.
who are the first ones going to be to leave?
Well, you were talking earlier about the problem of fear in organizations. Well, fear works very well in the short run. You can scare the devil out of people for a while, but in the long run, the people who don't like to work in those environments, and most people don't, are the ones that leave or want to leave, and the ones who can leave are the ones you don't want to leave because they tend to be your better employees. They have options.
Let's talk about that first fun work environment study.
Okay.
Who did you talk to?
We did actually an online survey of human resource managers, and there were probably over 4,000 that we surveyed, and they sent back to us an enormous amount of information. One of the interesting things you learn in survey work is that if you ever get anybody to fill it out, you're doing well. But even more than that, if they have something to add to it, it's really amazing. And we had over 400 people of the 500 plus that responded add in stuff about what they're doing in their organization and how they have fun. And so even though they're not having enough fun in their organizations, each of them, or many of them, 400 out of the sample we had, responded that they have something going that they wanted to tell us about.
So that's how important it was to them.
Yes.
It was really stood out, probably bigger than the 70% of the time that they're not having a good time.
It is, and I think they may be having fun, but they're not having enough fun. I think that's a distinction worthy of making, that everybody has fun sometime in their organization or they leave.
We used to have things in the newsroom, they called them post-mortems, and what they were is everybody would stay and watch, go into the news director's office, and the screens would be on of all 3 stations, and you'd watch and you'd see what you missed or what they missed. And with one particular boss, everybody stayed. You weren't paid for it. It was mostly kind of you stayed because it looked good or you were interested. But this one particular boss who was great, and we'd go out together and there was always a joke. Everyone would crowd into his office. But there were other ones where if you could hightail out of there, you would, because he would be grumbling and picking apart your stuff and not really looking for the good stuff. And that was about the time I left.
Well, I mean, the research is clear. We talked earlier also about Patch Adams, and everybody's seen the movie Patch Adams and the doctor coming in with a big red nose and the floppy shoes and laughing at the fact that somebody would actually do that who was a medical doctor. But the evidence is on the table. There's actually been a set of studies done in medicine to show the relationship between people who are laughing and people who are getting better faster and people who are enjoying the situation they're in more than they would if they weren't. So this has a lot of beneficial outcomes to it. I mean, there's levels of fun. Obviously, you can smile or you can have a good old-fashioned belly laugh, but the point is that the environment you create by promoting a sense of fun does in fact have beneficial outcomes for both the persons who work there and the organization that employs them.
You mentioned that there is a fast food place close to my house, and it's a Spanish chain, Spanish fast food. And we go with the kids, and even my children say, my little 7-year-old said, I like coming here because they're so nice. And every time we go, we comment on I almost feel like we're going into their home and they're cooking for us. You can watch them cook there, and it's really great. And I think that you're right. I think it's one of the reasons we go back. We have to actually go out of our way to go there.
Well, it goes back to what I said earlier. There's this, the whole hospitality industry, there's an effort to make sure that the people who are facing your customers are smiling and having fun and and evoke that sense that they're enjoying themselves, so that the people who are coming in the door to pay good money for whatever the service experience is that they're having, whether it's your restaurant or it's a hotel or whatever it may be, can feel like they're also having a good time in an environment that feels good.
Right.
Positive
Let's talk
work
about
environment.
some of the. You said the book is a book full of jokes. For people who are watching, I'm hoping there are some bosses who are thinking, okay, I want to do this, and you have to go buy the book, by the way, right?
Right,
We can't just.
of
We're
course.
not going to read it all to you. You have to go
Right.
buy it. But some ideas from the book to give them, show them how fabulous it is.
Well, what we try to do in the book is we recognize in the research we did and some other work that we've been doing is a lot of bosses just don't feel comfortable trying to be humorous, and they just can't make it happen.
They're not naturally funny people.
No, some people just aren't that way. And actually the last joke in this book speaks to that. And maybe I should tell you that. It's about the boss that came to the organization and was very boring. Everybody fell asleep in his meetings and they wouldn't listen to him. And he just wasn't getting any response from his employees. And so his boss suggested he go and learn how to tell jokes. So he went to one of these arenas where you can learn this kind of thing, sort of like, like
Funny for Dummies?
Toastmasters for jokes, jokesters. And he went there, and after a while, he got into the swing of it, and he realized that the people had told the same jokes so many times they assigned numbers to them. And so people would stand up and they'd say 32, and everybody would burst into laughter and an uproarious kind of response. And somebody else would stand up and say 145, and everybody would go, "Oh, that's a great joke," and they'd all go laughing. And this guy, when he first got there, he would stand up and he'd say 63, and nobody laughed. And so the fellow sitting next to him turned to him and said, "It's all in the way you say it." And you get that kind of thing. You got to learn how to tell these jokes, but you got to have some material to work with. And that's essentially what the book was trying to do as well, is to not only give people some material to work with, so to speak, but also to give them some organization of that material. So we have organized all these anecdotes and jokes into categories. We have jokes about decision making and participation and communications and the kind of motivation, the kinds of things that managers, speakers, or trainers are going to have to deal with as they go through their managerial role, their training role, or their speaking role. And it gives them an opportunity to sort of break the ice at the beginning, open the door to a conversation on a particular topic, and then drive that topic home. But it's a whole lot easier to get people's attention when you start them laughing than it is when you start them off with a scowl.
Right, and I think also if a manager is somewhat self-effacing, or it comes into it, even if they did something and it wasn't funny, to make a joke about how unfunny he was, that probably helps as well.
And you can use humor to make bad situations not quite so bad, too. And in a self-effacing way to combine two things. I'll give you another example. There's this anecdote in here about a farmer who went to town with his mule to pick up his newlywed wife and bringing her back to his farm. And they were driving back on the mule, and as about a third of the way back, the mule reared up and bucked and stopped. And so the farmer got out of the buggy that he was in and went around to the front of the mule, and he said, "That's one." And then he got back in, the mule started up again, and they went down the road a little bit further, and the mule did the same thing again. Same bit, he got out of the buggy, walked around, stood in front of the mule, and he said, "That's two." And went a little bit further along, and the mule did it again a third time. And this time the farmer got out of the buggy and had a shotgun with him, and he shot the mule. "That's three." And he gets back in the buggy to pick up his possessions, and his wife says to him, You're not a very nice person. That was an awful thing to do. You've caused all this kind of problem. Look at what you did to this mule." And he turned to her and he said, "That's one." And the point of that is you can bring that into an organizational situation where you talk to your employees and said, once you tell that joke, you can say, "I had a meeting with my boss today, and we need to work together here because the boss told me today that's one."
That'll work.
That'll work.
We'll be right back. We'll continue talking with Dr. Ford in just a moment. We're talking with Dr. Robert Ford, and we're going to try to get your boss to loosen up and have a little bit more fun at work because it's better for business.
Absolutely, and better for him.
One of the things you wrote about also is, do I serve my customer or my supervisor? And I've got to tell you, in television news, there were times, and when I was in particular situations, when, especially in what I did, you had to really weigh what the boss's perception is and what the boss wanted versus what may be what we were supposed to do. It was best for the public interest. And it was with some people, it was a hard line to try to straddle. But that's not unusual in many, many fields, I'm sure.
Almost everyone has a situation where you have conflicting expectations. And historically it used to be the supervisor, the man in the middle between representing his employees and representing the organization. Who does he represent? But we see this far more intensely, I guess would be the term, in the service industry in general. Whenever you have a customer in front of you who does not pay your salary necessarily, although he or she may tip you, and does not supervise you, although he or she may give you directions on what you should have done when you didn't do it right, and doesn't really have a direct supervisory role like your boss does, has a huge influence in your life and how you live it and what you do and your enjoyment of it. And so we've been fascinated. We've done some research in pursuing this fascination of the Janus-headed effect, if you will, where you have to look in two directions simultaneously because your boss is telling you to do one thing, your customer is telling you to do another thing. What do you do?
The customer is always right is not here anymore. That's gone.
Well, it's an interesting thing. We actually did a study where we invented a little questionnaire index trying to measure whether or not people in a conflict situation where there's a real moral dilemma would in fact yield to the customer or obey their moral principles and the organizational mission. And we found out, you're right, that these folks that are in the customer service industry tend to get so overwhelmed by this, the customer is always right, and if you don't take care of the customer, somebody else will, and that kind of a mantra that they wound up overriding any moral guidance they might have. Where we did this study was with dealing with customers in a hotel situation where a hotel would say, this is our moral standards, we hire good people, we supervise them closely, and then a customer would come in and says, can you help me find something? And the something that they wanted to help finding may or may not have been the appropriate kind of thing for the organization to endorse. It's a very tough situation.
And it probably happens quite often.
But it happens to doctors too. I mean, doctors and nurses and college professors always have an organizational policy of doing one thing, and you have a customer or a client or a person that's talking to you on the other side of the coin asking you to do something that may or may not be.
And you could probably deflect that with humor.
You could.
It might be easier than telling the customer, no, that's against our standards. It would probably hurt their feelings. If you made a joke about it, maybe you could change their mind.
That'd be one way to do it, although it's hard to tell a tearful student who wants to know why you won't make an exception in his or her case, why you can't make a violation of policy. There's not many jokes that work in those situations.
No, I think that would probably be a really big problem.
That'd be a stretch.
And it's funny I'm thinking of the things that had happened with us. We went out to dinner for our anniversary, and very rare with 3 kids that you get to go out. So we went to this really, really nice restaurant. It was a major treat for us.
Right.
2 hours later, we had not gotten our meal. It was getting close to 10:30 at night, and we had kept asking the waitress, and we started asking for the manager. And when the manager finally arrived at 11 o'clock, we had arrived at 8:30, she said, I didn't know. And I think that probably was a situation where that happened. Yeah. She was more afraid of the manager than she was of us. And we will never go back.
Of course not.
But my brother told a story about a friend of his that went to a very chic place in South Florida, very, very big time South Beach fancy restaurant, and 2.5 hours into the meal they called Domino's and they'd had a pizza delivered to the table. And I said, how did that manager respond? And the manager responded by asking if he could have a piece and then comping the dinner. So it was two situations, the same thing handled in very different ways, and they said they'd go back. It was a bad night.
He used a joke.
He used a joke. He absolutely did. And this other woman said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know that you were sitting here for 2 hours and 45 minutes. So, the joke really works. Speaking of, will you give us another joke from your book?
Sure. When I give presentations, a lot of times I'm always worried that the audience is going to understand what I'm saying. So I want to open up the gate to them asking me questions right at the front end. And so I very typically will tell this story, which of course now that I'm telling it with you, I'll never be able to use it again.
No, well, don't listen to this part.
But the story goes like this: there's a very fine little old lady, the quintessential little old lady, who wanted a pet because she was lonely, and so she went to a pet store and said to the pet store owner, I would really like to have a pet because I'm lonely and I have no one to come see me, and I like somebody around or something around, and can you help me out? And the pet store owner said, well, you know, these things can be pretty expensive. She said, well, I don't have much money. And he said, geez, I'm not sure I can help you. And so she looked pretty sad, despondent, and started walking out the door. And he said, but wait a minute, maybe I have an idea. I have this parrot that might be something that you could use, but I got to warn you, this parrot has a real problem, and I'm really hesitant to sell it to you. And the lady said, well, what's the problem? And he said, well, the parrot swears. And he swears pretty badly. And I'm not sure you'd find it very comfortable to have a swearing parrot around your house. And she said, yes, but it's inexpensive, I'll take it. So she brings the parrot home, puts it in her sitting room, which is between her bedroom and her kitchen, and nothing happens for a couple of weeks, and then she's walking from her bedroom into the kitchen, and sure enough, the parrot starts swearing. And so she walks over very calmly, pays no attention to the words, which aren't very nice, picks up the bird, walks into her kitchen, opens the freezer door, sticks the bird in, and waits 15 minutes. Pulls the parrot out, puts it back on the perch, and walks away without a word. A couple weeks go by, nothing further was said. Once again, she's walking from her bedroom into the kitchen. Parrot cuts loose with the really, really worse words that he used the last time. Goes again, picks up the parrot, walks in the kitchen, sticks it in the freezer, waits a half an hour this time. Pulls the parrot back out, puts it back, a chilly parrot, back on the perch, and walks away. Nothing further happens for another couple of weeks. And so finally, 2 weeks later, she's walking out, and the parrot cuts loose. And this time it's terrible. The proverbial makes a sailor blush kind of humor. And she sticks the parrot in the freezer for an hour.
Parrotsicle.
And this time she parrotsicle, puts it back, a very cold parrot, sticks it back on the freezer, on the perch, and walks away without saying a word. She's never said a word to the parrot. And finally, a couple of weeks later, she walks back out, and the parrot says, lady. And she said, yes. And he said, look, I'm not going to swear anymore, I promise, but you got to tell me one thing. And she said, what's that? And the parrot says, what did that turkey say? And it kind of opens up the door to a discussion of, you know, be comfortable in asking me questions, because don't be the turkey.
That's a good one. That poor turkey. That's a good one. We touched a little bit on how you make people laugh within the office.
Right.
I also found in situations, in my work situation, if there were picnics, if there were Christmas parties, if we had a softball team that went and played with Special Olympics kids, we worked so much better. What do you think about that?
Well, again, I'll go back to the study. You know, we asked people what they did to promote fun in their work environment. And there were several things that popped to the top, so to speak, and one of them was exactly that. Almost invariably, when people talked about what makes a fun work environment, food's in it. You know, either coming in or going out. You know, you either have food with picnics or after pizza parties or ice cream parties or birthday parties or whatever the case might be, or conversely, Weight Watchers.
When they have the meetings at the office, yeah.
Yeah.
We did that at one point. Some people had done that. We were doing some programs with them, and that did work. But you know, it's funny, nobody ever wanted to work holidays, but Thanksgiving, one of the local restaurants would bring in a feast.
Yeah.
So all the single people who didn't have anywhere to go they had their own little Thanksgiving fest.
And you knew what the turkey said, too. Yeah.
I did.
Yeah.
I absolutely did. Never said it again,
Yeah.
though. So the actual camaraderie, after work camaraderie,
Yes.
as well as outside of the office, really does work. It wasn't just our situation.
No. And again, I think it's interesting that you compare the fact that people don't think they're having enough fun, but the things they are doing that are promoting fun, they do it a lot. And one of the things is to have kinds of parties and food kind of opportunities, having a dinner or whatever. A second thing that organizations did to promote fun, which is one of the top 3 as well, was the idea of celebrating successes. And people like to have their successes celebrated publicly, just as much as you hate to have your
Professional
failures.
and personal?
Yes, both. Just as much as you hate to have your failures celebrated publicly, you do like to have your successes celebrated publicly. And we all like to be, get a pat in the back in front of our boss and all that kind of stuff. And
I think you are absolutely
It's a
right. And
terrific-
I'm so lucky I have such a fun boss. Who's
You have to say
doesn't
that.
need this. And he's listening to me right now. Leading with a laugh, 101 funny stories with 300 serious insights and lessons for managers. Dr. Robert Ford, thank you so much for
Thank you.
joining us. And you'll come back again. We'll talk about some of your other work.
Okay, I appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm Charna Davis-Wiese. Thanks for joining us. See you next time.